Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Good Trade Summit. It's been jointly organized by the International Trade Center and the Business Council for International Understanding. The ITC is a joint agency of the WTO and the UN. It connects small businesses in developing countries to international markets. And the BCIU is a group of educators, advisors, and experts, and they are committed to international partnerships. We have a truly remarkable lineup of dignitaries, experts, and participants today. It's very exciting. I think we're going to cover a lot of fascinating topics, so thank you so much for joining us. Before I begin, I would like to introduce Pamela Coke-Hamilton. She's the Executive Director of the International Trade Center, and she will welcome you with more.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. It's really good to see you so early in the morning. I know that everybody has conflicting obligations and there's a lot going on everywhere. So thank you so much for joining us this morning. So Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first Good Trade Summit in New York. Yay! I'm really delighted to be with you here in New York today. And I'd especially like to recognize our partners, the Business Council for International Understanding. Thank you, Peter, for being our friend and stalwart collaborator as we work with companies throughout global supply chains towards a more sustainable future. I'm thrilled to share this opening panel with Toyin Yora Saraki. I was just telling her that I'm 48% Nigerian, so, you know, I'm just claiming all the... She even found which tribe I'm from. I'm Fulani. So anyway, her impressive advocacy and philanthropic work on behalf of women, infants, and children is changing the conversation around healthcare in Africa and around the world. We've actually decided where they're going to open a center for sustainable and training for women nurses because so much are taken from the Caribbean and Africa. Anyway, its work resonates deeply with me, both as a mother myself and as the executive director of an agency that believes firmly in inclusion and women's economic empowerment. As we take in the lessons with the SDG Summit and prepare for the future, we need people like Toyin and organizations like the Wellbeing Foundation Africa to help us chart a better path towards sustainability. We really heard sobering news this week at the SDG Summit that for most of the Sustainable Development Goals, we're well off track. 15% is the number. Scarier still, in some cases, we're going backwards. Worse off now than when the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals was agreed 8 years ago. With climate change, the news is also grim. Many of us were talking about the downpour in New York on Tuesday. Was it Tuesday or Monday? Tuesday. I don't remember the days because, you know. This month, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change shared a new report outlining findings from technical talks on climate change mitigation under the Global Stocktake, a process which concludes at COP28 this year. Unfortunately, this report confirms our worst fears, that we have a rapidly narrowing window for staying with the Paris Agreement's 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature limit. The UNFCCC report also reaffirmed that we've learned from our own work at the ITC that future decisions about climate action must be driven by equity and that those affected by climate impact should be involved in crafting the solutions. This is key. Over 90% of the world's businesses are small enterprises. They're drivers of jobs and growth and pillars of their communities and the global economy alike. They're also often on the front lines of climate change. Without the active involvement of small businesses, especially in developing countries, we will fail at achieving the SDGs and we will be unable to avert catastrophic global warming. And this failure will affect us all. In concrete terms, that failure would lead to more people being unable to provide healthy food for their families. It would lead to more people displaced from their homes due to climate change. It will lead to our natural resources becoming so depleted that we will struggle to fulfill our most basic needs, such as clean water. It's why I work in this field, because I believe the story of sustainable development needs a better ending. To avoid these outcomes, we must reshape our global economic frameworks so that they better serve the SDGs. But we also need the private sector to take an active part in making the transition towards more sustainable production and consumption practices a reality. This is an effort that must bring all businesses together, large and small. That is why we're here today, to talk about trade, and especially the role of the private sector in moving us towards a better path. Trade has a vital role to play in helping the SDGs stay within reach. Trade can also, if we're not careful, get in the way. We must ensure that our efforts towards greater sustainability do not come at the expense of the small businesses that serve as the backbone of the global economy. That's why we need to work with small businesses to help them prepare for the future. We already know that we cannot avoid some of the climate change's worst impact, but we can work with small businesses so they're better prepared. We can work with them to ensure they remain competitive in an increasingly crowded market, especially as they work to comply with an ever-growing number of sustainability regulations and standards. We can work with them as they develop innovative new approaches to their production practices, including through the use of new technologies. We can help them build their resilience to shocks, whether these come from a changing climate, from public health crises like COVID, from conflicts, or from other challenges still on the horizon. When we talk about sustainability, we often look at big picture goals: averting deforestation, mitigating climate change, ending forced labor. These are important objectives, but we must also remember that if we don't design policies, regulations, and practices with the needs of small businesses in mind, we can cause more harm than good. The risk, if we're not careful, is that these businesses will be shut out of international markets and global supply chains, making us all the poorer for it. This is why ITC works actively with small businesses to give them the market information they need as they make their decisions, help link them with international buyers, build their capacity on implementing sustainability standards and other regulations, and improve their digital connectivity. These steps are crucial for ensuring these businesses can be competitive on the international stage while helping deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals. Today, we're seeing a growing commitment from large multinational businesses to make supply chains more sustainable, and to do so in a way that empowers and supports smaller enterprises. At the ITC, this is the kind of news that drives us and helps us see what's possible. And we have an exciting announcement to make this morning. Today, we're launching a call to action dedicated to uniting sustainable actions. What's the idea behind this call to action? For large companies, institutions, and other organizations working across global supply chains to commit to abiding by 5 core principles, which together can move us closer to achieving the SDGs. This call to action brings together over 70 signatories that are innovators in their respective fields, and there's room at the table for more to join. The call to action signatories include among them the full membership of the Initiative for Compliance and Sustainability, an international effort devoted to making working conditions better across various sectors, from textiles and garments to electronics and furniture. Many of these businesses are household names, and their influence extends throughout the world. The signatories also include international bodies like the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, leading standards such as the Global Organic Textile Standard, and our Good Trade Summit co-host, the Business Council for International Understanding. And what does this call to action entail? Its 5 principles are small business empowerment, sustainability, transparency, collaboration, and digitalization. These aren't just buzzwords. They are principles that are integral to changing how our supply chains work, and for the better. For instance, these companies collectively recognize the value of transparency and are sharing publicly what they've learned about what works well and what doesn't. This provides a valuable learning opportunity for smaller business and is a major step towards building trust and strong relationships throughout the value chain. I'll give you an example of what this looks like in practice. JOTT, a jacket manufacturer who has signed onto the call to action, now has on its website its entire suppliers list. And you can see their full supply chain in ITC Sustainability Map. I really encourage you to visit the Sustainability Map. It really is a phenomenal platform. As we look ahead, I hope you take this message to heart. We cannot achieve sustainable development without trade, and small businesses are integral to that effort. COP28 will be the first big checkpoint for the Paris Agreement, and the UAE's COP presidency has, for the first time in the history of the UN climate talks, included a thematic day on trade. As we prepare for these conversations, and those still to come, it is essential that small businesses have a seat at the table. If done right, trade can help us get on a healthier path. We can look forward to economic growth that is far more inclusive and sustainable than the growth models of the past. We can look forward to food systems and supply chains that provide good jobs and ensure no one goes hungry. We can envision more women owning and leading businesses and see these businesses be competitive on the international market. These are just a few examples of what's possible, and I look forward to discussing more with you today. Thank you.
I am thrilled to introduce Her Excellency Toyin Saraki, founder and president of the Wellbeing Foundation in Africa.
Good morning. Pamela Cook-Hamilton, the ED of the International Trade Center, and Peter Tuchansky, the president and CEO of the Business Council for International Understanding. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Toyin Saraki, and I'm the founder and president of the Wellbeing Foundation Africa, an NGO headquartered in Nigeria, which works to improve the health and well-being outcomes for women, infants, and children across the country and actually across the region. We prioritized frontline impact with global advocacy in alignment with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and we also support socioeconomic empowerment through fostering spaces and opportunities where women and youth-led small businesses can thrive. So it's a huge privilege for me as an African woman to address you today at the Good Trade Summit 2023, which I see to be an event of profound significance that underscores the principles of global cooperation, sustainability, and the role of policy in forging sustainable supply chains. As we convene here in 2023, we all find ourselves at a critical juncture in our quest for a more equitable and sustainable world. This year marks the midpoint in the implementation of the SDGs and the 2030 Agenda, which was a global commitment to unite us in our pursuit of a greater, better future. I want to extend my deepest appreciation to His Excellency Dennis Francis, the President-elect of the 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly, for his visionary call to action, which is rebuilding trust and reigniting global solidarity, accelerating action on the 2030 Agenda and its SDGs towards peace, prosperity, progress, and sustainability for all. His leadership truly sets the tone for our discussions today and also underscores the urgency of our mission. Achieving the SDGs with particular emphasis on climate and health action necessitates much more than fragmented efforts. It demands global cooperation and active participation in the leadership of the private sector. This imperative holds particular significance in a nation such as mine, Nigeria, which is a country that is grappling with its unique set of challenges and opportunities, but also has scored several significant victories. In Nigeria, the implementation of sustainable supply chains isn't just a global concern. It's a local mission that impacts livelihoods and economic development. We stand in Nigeria as a prime example of the global interdependence of supply chains, from the extraction of raw materials to the manufacturing of goods and their distribution globally. Our nation plays an integral role. So it's incumbent upon us to examine and address the sustainability concerns in our supply chains, considering not only our national interests, but also our global responsibilities. The ITC call to action, Unified Strength, Collective Impact, embodies empowerment, collaboration, and digital transparency, serving as a catalyst for tangible positive change across all the global value chains. The role of policy building in building supply chains cannot be overstated. As we must move from policy to practice, it's actually essential to empower businesses to drive the SDG agenda by focusing on amplifying the voices and visibility of small businesses within policy dialogues related to sustainability requirements and regulation imposed by importing countries. We must also explore government and industry solutions to encourage women and children to contribute to value chains. Many women and youth in Nigeria own and run small businesses already, but they don't know how to grow their revenue or to streamline their reach. The government and the private sector can help women with microfinance and loan programs and also invest through mentoring and sponsorship. So we must support our youth and female entrepreneurs to be autonomous and successful, to bolster our economies and societies. To give you one example, the Wellbeing Foundation has been working in Sokoto and Kano states to reduce the burden of diarrhea through promoting low osmolarity zinc and oral rehydration solutions. But the bulk of that work actually lies in working with the Drug Revolving Fund to help small hospitals in those areas actually manage their supplies, create demand, and satisfy that demand sustainably. Today marks the commencement of our journey towards a more sustainable and inclusive future, both in Nigeria and across the globe. Our journey today at the Good Trade Summit transcends borders as I look at the faces and imagine the thoughts and visions of all of you sitting in this room today, your ideologies, and the generations of the corporate sector that you represent. This journey will rely on the power of global cooperation, policy, and the innovative spirit of our youth. Our shared commitment to building sustainable and inclusive supply chains will also shape a brighter future for generations to come as we bridge the gaps between policy and practice and as we facilitate dialogue amongst private sectors across the value chains, from suppliers to brands and retailers, and even in the area of human capital development. I think we have all witnessed what has happened in the last year, where the global north has reached out to the global south to actually bolster its health worker shortages. And this is something that I hope we will address within the call to action, because we need to refill the pipeline at our end, but we also need to put our health workers in a better negotiating position as they are being trained and going abroad, and we must encourage those who are retired to come back and become the trainers of our future. Together, I hope that we will accelerate action on the 2030 Agenda and Sustainable Development Goals, and together I also hope and pray that we will work to rebuild trust and to reignite global solidarity, forging this path towards peace, prosperity, progress, and a more equitable future for all. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. And now we have Peter Czaczanski, President and CEO of the Business Council for International Understanding.
Good morning, everyone. It's amazing to be on the same panel as our two prior speakers. BCIU was introduced to the International Trade Organization 3 months ago when we collaborated on the Aim for Climate Summit, and we're grateful to Secretary Kerry's team for facilitating that introduction. One of my great idols is the WTO Director General Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. So when you mix John Kerry's influence, with Ngosi's influence, it's pretty irresistible. So the organization that I and our team are driving is really intending to assist the business world at the intersection with government, and with an increasing focus on understanding the multilateral system and trying to encourage the multilateral system to become as business friendly as they possibly can, even if that's going to require a change in mindset. And so I think it was demonstrated vividly during the pandemic as to how essential working with competent global corporations is, and whether we like it or not, it's not really material, because it's important for SMEs around the world to be able to access the global supply chains of the 50, 100, 500 most important global companies. So when we think at BCIU about how this happens, we're encouraged, actually. We're actually sort of optimistic. In a world where you can only control the things you can control, what I think is most inspiring is how younger executives who grew up on the SDGs and who want to work with organizations that are purpose-driven, how that has been catalyzed by the expectation of stakeholders that they will only buy from companies that they believe check out on their own terms. And then the rigor that companies just have to follow and apply in order not to be left behind or to be seen as flat-footed. So I come from this at a very kind of, I would say, kind of granular perspective in knowing that the journey that these companies, many of these companies are taking is still early, but it's sincere and it's happening. So the message to SMEs around the world is raise your hand and try to get connected. And that doesn't, geography or gender or anything doesn't really have any unique impact on any of that. So one of the things that BCIU gets really excited about is trying to help serve the underserved, which we try to be the most idealistic, entity in any of these partnerships. It's very difficult to match the idealism that you brought to this, but nevertheless, we continue to try. And how watching global supply chains really have to understand what it means, scope 3 and so on. I think it all drives towards progress and collaboration. So I think that what we always look for is how do we be an additive to what companies are doing and try to maintain a high standard of the companies that we work with. And one of the very best examples in my experience of a company that has, sort of the rigor, the know-how, the experience, the track record is one of our co-hosts today, which is Valmont, known around the world as Valley in many cases. So it's a company that makes center pivot irrigation systems. So when you're flying and you see these large green spaces, these are not aliens. These are the contribution of these big irrigation systems. And Josh Dixon, who's a member of the board of BCIU, who's here today from Omaha, has been looking to governments and to stakeholders to provide the path to transformational agricultural projects. So they're selling equipment, they're trying to keep up with their competition, but yet just a year or so ago, it helped to activate or to operationalize one of the world's largest irrigation projects in history, maybe even the history of the planet. And when you think about this is in Egypt, so when you think about this, how Russia's invasion of Ukraine, unwarranted and criminal, had affected the price of food and access to food, frankly, and where Josh and his company, working with the administration in Egypt and local authorities, have already had several wheat harvests, not being able to foresee that the invasion was going to exacerbate the problem of feeding people in Egypt, but as a consequence of trying to do big things, it has had that effect as well of of giving the people in Egypt a hope that the price of their food won't be as inflated by the shock of Putin's invasion. So if you can multiply that example, that to me is why there's a basis for real optimism in how you look to global corporations to keep improving. And I think, again, the role that we've tried to play is to help introduce, if you can say, SMEs who are ready into the global supply chain. So it's really a message of thanks and to some extent optimism that the corporate sector is heading in the right direction. And I think that just the kind of narrative that we've heard already this morning gives us a real sort of faith that this will be business-led in many respects. And every time you can, when you're engaging a local policymaker, remind them, if you will, that not only is history watching, but the competition for attracting the best companies to your region, your city, is global now, and companies they have to choose places where they can predict the outcomes. So countries are going to fall behind if they haven't understood at least that basis for what's their individual responsibility in these partnerships. So just thanks again to John Kerry's team and to our partners today for giving us this chance to learn with you. And we look forward to being known as positive in all of this, and grateful to Valmont and to my team especially for bringing this as far as it's come, which I must say is quite early stages. And in an inability to boil the ocean, we want to just be as consistent and responsive to the stakeholders that are trying to make the world a better place. So that's our point. And we're here in New York City, which is a commercial capital. So there's a lot of policy that's being thought of in capitals, but you can go out to the street today, more days than you go out on the street today, and there'll be very few people thinking about the frameworks that we're talking about. They'll be thinking about, hustle. They'll be thinking about closing transactions. They'll be thinking about getting paid, and so SMEs were the basis in a way of how the U.S. grew its economy, and small businesses are often not as well understood for their contribution. And so the point is, using sort of an American framework for this, if you can grow the middle class in a country, Nigeria's growing middle class, that's where people are focused in Nigeria. It's the Ibadan-Lagos corridor, which neglects the north of the country, but it does give, it's a market. And so you're going to attract companies. It's almost too big of a market for a global company to ignore, even though it's been fraught, as a place to do business. So, so those fundamentals, as well as the incentives that companies are now operating through, that will make sure that at least some of the best prepared SMEs are going to win the day. And so encourage SMEs to prepare their slide decks, know their audience. It's going to take stamina. Many times there will be rejection. One has to be open to even being acquired as a company. And so there's just a lot of reality in terms of how these sorts of things get done. And to just finish by saying that when Josh explained to me last year that to challenge himself, he wanted to present his board of directors through the lens of the SDGs. And for an American publicly traded company, 75 years old, that would have never been the case, right? I mean, would you imagine that a boardroom of principally, Americans, principally white, that would, say that I'm going to just start changing the way I talk to my board. And I have to say that, once you've done that once, you're never going to not do it, I don't think. So it takes a great deal of patience, and I think, leaning towards trust, and even if a company has had a history, which may not be perfect, you want to still associate with these companies as best you possibly can. So it's sort of a little bit of slightly abstract perhaps, but I do think that BCIU really stands for encouraging the best companies to be their best and to try and assist that process every step where we can be additive. So I'm grateful for your attention. Thanks very much for being here at this first of many. And I hope we have a robust conversation this morning, and knowing that this is only just the beginning. So thanks very, very much, everybody, for. Thank you.
Have our first panel discussion. It's called Turning the Tide, the Role of Policy in Building Sustainable Supply Chains. And we are very lucky to have a great panel today. We've got Fiona Shera, Director of the Division for Sustainable and Inclusive Trade at the International Trade Center, Sandra Hani, Global Climate Policy Lead for Climate in the International Chamber of Commerce, Maria Peña, President of the CLAC in the Dominican Republic, and Gilles Rameau de Roche, Chief Citizenship and Institutional Affairs Officer at Schneider Electric. Come on up, everyone. Challenges that businesses face in transitioning to more environmentally sustainable operations?
Thank you, Tracy, and really it's an honor to be here today, and it's really a topic that's very close to ICC's heart, to our mission, and very close to my heart as well. So really thank you for the ITC, thank you to the Business Council for International Understanding, for really bringing us here together. I think I won't repeat what we already heard. We are really at an inflection point. I think we have heard it very clearly at the SDG Summit. We are really nowhere near the 4.2 trillion that are needed in terms of the financing for developing countries. Also, we will hear it very clearly at today's SDG Climate Summit, also in terms of where we stand for the implementation of the Paris Agreement, and many more issues that we are currently facing. I think I would like just to start that I was really struck by a framing of an event that I attended, a development-focused event, where basically the message was that trade was not inclusive and has not contributed to increased inequalities. I think this is a very dangerous positioning of trade. I think we have very empirical evidence that trade has lifted some 1 billion out of poverty. Of course, there are many more things to do, but I think we really, instead of really positioning trade in opposition to the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement, really rather ask ourselves the question what we can do more to really empower trade and SMEs and supply chains to even play a bigger role. I think there's a lot of potential. I think your organizations are already thinking about this. I think we at the ICC, we were really created and with the mission to drive trade as really a driver of peace and prosperity. And so really started on it of thinking. I think the good news is that really across our networks, we're seeing that there is a lot of willingness of SME supply chains to do more. There is a study we are currently developing that we will publish at COP in Dubai, where we, together with the UK tech company Sage, where we are seeing that really, compared to last year, there's an increase of 10% of SMEs really doing more and willing. So there's now 83% of the markets that we investigated that are really willing and are already doing. But honestly, what we are also seeing, just there are real challenges still for them to do more. And I think there are particular three. I think we are seeing on the finance side, really they're facing huge upfront costs in terms of investing in the net zero transition. I think really the cost on how they can do this, I think that's really needs attention. The second is really the increased regulatory reporting frameworks. And this is not, we are really understanding, it's not that there is not a willingness, it's really, they are very afraid of the complexities and really the high compliance administrative burden. And then the last issue is really the lack of capacity and understanding and also tools, in particular on the digital tools to measure the impact. So I think these are one of the critical issues we are seeing. And finally, just the final point, also increasingly this fear and anxiety of SMEs, particularly in the development world, to be excluded from important markets such as the European Union. And my point is really not here that we should lower the standards and we should lower the ambition. I think it's great what the European Union and other countries are doing, but I think there needs to be a real consideration of what the impacts are on the small business, in particular in the developing countries. I will stop here and maybe we discuss next the solutions that we would like to see.
Right. Well, I mean, you bring up an interesting point about small businesses being so essential to helping to lift people out of poverty in trade, but also maybe the burdens of regulation and things being harder on small businesses than they are on larger enterprises. How can that be addressed? And what do you see as, why is that important to address? Why is it important to include small businesses in trade?
I think in particular to come up with really an understanding of where the frictions are and what in terms of the policies need to be done in terms of helping them. I think also, again, taking the example of the European Union, I think there what we really would like to see is really a bit more system to bring them, the SMEs, into the development of these standards and really trying to understand what impacts they have. I think really that in terms of this engagement is really important. And then, of course, we also need, I think we really need to look also at the incentives side. So, I mean, there's an important policy side, but of course also an incentives part. And on the investment side as well, I think we really need to help them provide easier access to financing. I think there is also a lot that can be done in terms of the public sector working together with the financial sector in developing innovative solutions for this. And I'm not sure, I'm happy to share a bit more what ICC is doing, but you might want to take another round.
Yes, Marika, I noticed you were nodding during a lot of this. You work with a lot of small farmers who are probably dealing with some of the same issues that small businesses are. Farm is very much a small business. What do you see as maybe some of the obstacles for small-scale farmers, and maybe what are some of the solutions and some of the progress that you're seeing?
Yes, is it on?
I think it's off.
Okay, it's on now. Yes, I agree a lot. I do see opportunities and risk at the same time. There are new regulations coming up on issues that are not new, because we have had voluntarily standards on addressing human and environmental risks, which didn't work, honestly. It didn't work and motivated only a small number of businesses to really address very serious issues that we can see in many supply chains. These are now mandatory, and I don't think that from voluntary to mandatory, everything will change automatically. And I do think, as you said, that we need to think about incentives more than about sanctions. Because if it's a sanction-based compliance, businesses will try to find a way around it. If it's incentive-based, I hope it will motivate businesses to sit down with small farmers. In our case, we represent over 1,000 farmers organizations in Latin America and the Caribbean, to really dig into the many issues we can see in supply chains, which are structural. There is no easy fix on what we see. Trade probably has been part of the problem and definitely is part of the solution. So that is what I don't think there is a stronger tool than trade to find proper solutions to the many issues we see all over the world. It's the tool that reaches everybody, from producers to consumers. So it's something definitely we need to get on. We need to be together on this and motivate trades to be part of the solution. It's not automatically. You can build your trade system on maximum benefits or on distribution of value in a fair way. No, so what I do hope to see is that these new regulations make us more aware about the problem, but also that we are aware that there is no easy fix, that we need to be transparent on it, that it doesn't need to stay in the hidden or a taboo zone. We need to speak very frankly about, yes, we have child labor, yes, we have it, and why do we have it, and how can we address it? Yes, we have a lot of environmental issues. Why do we have it, and how we can best address it? But also, what kind of support is needed, which kind of capacity we need to build, and what is the time it takes. What worries me very much is that we now want to have everything risk-free. So we want to have proper products without deforestation now, tomorrow. We won't have it. Or products without child labor now, tomorrow. We won't have it. Because it takes more time to fix all these issues. So we need to speak about it, learn on it. But we also need to get our governments on with us. It's very Eurocentric, the debate. Everybody in Europe knows about it. They know what it means. And in some way, they're trying to address it and take it up as a responsibility. But our governments in the South, I don't think they're aware that they're part of this. There's not because small farmers are part of the solution, small businesses are part of the solutions, but need governmental support also, and that need to be built globally. It cannot be just built or developed or designed in Europe. It needs to be done together. So my hope is that we are getting a bottom-up approach and address the many, many issues that have solutions, and we should do it together. That's my hope. My fear is that businesses want to have risk-free supply chains and are leaving or stopping to supply from those areas that are major risk, which would be an unintended consequences, and we won't solve the issues we see for humans and for the environment.
Well, a lot of the farms that you're talking about and the small businesses are in emerging economies. So Fiona, you work a lot with emerging economies, and I'd love to ask you what the, I guess, level of awareness is about sustainability issues in emerging countries, but also maybe what are some of the obstacles that you're seeing, and possibly some of the solutions or success stories that you've seen in bringing solutions to emerging economies.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks to the panel. I know people have come a long way. It's been a crazy week, so we really appreciate your participation at our ITC's first Good Trade Summit. Awareness, and it's been talked about by my colleagues here, awareness is, for me, absolutely fundamental in terms of the building ownership and building the sustainability of the whole approach to transforming and becoming more climate smart and adapting to new regulations. And I think that one of the big challenges is that a lot of the people who are setting the regulations are not those who are involved in development or involved in trade. And that there is a massive awareness of the climate challenge. As you were saying, everyone's aware of it, everyone's talking about it. But I think that there is a certain sense of, naivety may be the wrong word, but a sense that this can happen sort of automatically without thinking through what actually is this about. It's about trade between a business in one country with a trade in another country, but there's a whole value chain along the way. And we are expecting that value chain to transform and to change very quickly, as Marika was saying. So what do we need in terms of awareness? I think we need a lot more understanding about the new regulations, particularly that we're seeing coming out of the EU, but more generally around sustainability and human rights and labour. We need much more of a dialogue about, so what does this mean for the different actors in the supply chain and also the governments? What can we build on already that's working? So one of the things that we've been trying to do, for example, around the new EU deforestation regulation is bring together governments with the regulators who have established the regulations to make them actually see what some of the realities are in the countries that are impacted by the new regulations. So there are a lot of practices already out there to build on. So regulations can be designed in a way that build on existing processes, that build on existing initiatives in country. But if people aren't aware of what the regulations require or of what is actually happening on the ground, that's not going to happen. And I think that's one of the big gaps at the moment in the whole process, is that regulations are being set by one party and expected to be implemented down a value chain. What we need to do is build understanding together, formulate regulations together, think about what the implementation looks like as well, and what needs to be done to support small businesses. And I wanted to just pick up on the point of why is this important, and Pamela says it all the time in her presentations, 90% of business in the world is done by small businesses. Okay, so if we're not bringing those businesses to the table, if we're not listening to the impact, we could be pushing forward on new legislation around sustainability, deforestation, but actually the cost of that could be very, very high. The cost of that could be lots of small businesses failing, lots of small businesses unable to trade, and the implications of that in terms of poverty, in terms of livelihoods, could be, really devastating. And we've seen that already, where one example, Nestle introduced some new requirements around where product was grown and that it wasn't in a protected area. The impact of that was 4,300 cocoa farmers in Ghana immediately lost their opportunity to trade with Nestle. So, this is the reality. It's about a small business operating, trying to survive. And there's many things we can do. Maybe we can pick up on that as the conversation goes on. But my kind of call to action is that we have that dialogue with regulators, that we do the analysis, we look at the impact, we think about what does this mean and how can it be implemented in a way that actually brings small businesses on board rather than forces them to comply with something which maybe they don't fully understand.
Yes. Well, Gilles, I'd love to ask you about the role of corporate America, or sorry, corporations in all of this. Sorry, I've been based in the U.S. for too long. I can turn everything into America. But what about large corporations, and what role do you see them playing, and maybe how can they help smaller businesses and smaller farmers achieve sustainability goals?
Thank you. It's true that I have a specific position in this round table. First, I'm a man in the middle of a woman.
Well done.
And second,
hope we're making you feel comfortable.
second, I'm the representative. It's not the reality, but in this round table, it's the case of the large worldwide biggest companies. My first comment, it's just to say that and to put that in a corner after, is that certainly to discuss about this topic, when we have to speak about food, agriculture, regenerative agriculture, we have in mind that is with a new farmer and not with big farmer in the same manner that the industry of food than yesterday. And we have here a specific topic which is very aligned to this topic, and I understand that your example for Nestlé, your job, is totally linked to that, and it's very good to progress in this field, because when we progress in one sector of activity, we have after that many other reality for the others. That is in terms of introduction. My second introduction, Schneider Electric, we are a big worldwide company in 120 countries with 150,000 employees, and our job is to produce electrical distribution, automation, far from the nature, but in order to make electricity green, safe, efficient, and so on, and to support all the system which use energy. 30 billion euro and a workforce everywhere with more than 200 plants. If we are not in this meeting, and if we face such type of questions with a lot of large worldwide companies in the last 10 years, very often the answer is, oh, you know. It's a very interesting question. And we would like to be very active on this topic, but you know, we have 100,000 suppliers in first year, and after that the second year, the third year. How do you consider that we can manage that? It's not possible. We have so big. And in many meetings where I was in the past, the answer was this answer. Yes. We have to do something to be more local, to know better our suppliers, to check many things in the suppliers. But you see, it's impossible. And good news, it's difficult to say that now because digital and because many other questions. When we face, I would like to have three words to express why the next step will be different. The first, when we would like to summarize the sustainability in the worldwide companies during the last 20 years, in fact, it was a battle between 10,000, 15,000 companies at the worldwide level to be in the Sustainability Champions League and to be the most sustainable company. It was the case of Schneider Electric in 2021, or to be in MSCI, Standard & Poor's, many different rankings at the top level. And the battle between all these companies which would like to be involved in sustainability, it's to be in this position. And to do that, a lot of program, and we have to be positive on this program about well-being at workplace, social coverage, how do we reduce our own carbon emission, new energy, circular economy, ethic, men of women in the management, blah, blah, blah. A lot of topics, very interesting topic, but just to progress company by company. And the leaders of the company express, it's very interesting in terms of responsibility, but it's very efficient. When we do that, we are more attractive, the company is better, the performance of the company is better. But it is true for your company. It's true for your partners. When you deploy something in your company and you express, we have a large program to be inclusive men or women and to have to share the leadership, to have the same level of salary. And because we do that, we are more attractive, more innovative, etc. All the things that we can say that. But if we consider that, we need to support our suppliers to be more attractive, to be better. It's why it's the first step about this topic. The second step is from carbon. When we speak about sustainability, sustainable development goals, it's true that on the table very often now when you ask someone about sustainability, the answer is carbon. But now the answer is carbon, and we are focused on carbon change. The carbon footprint in the company consider not only the scope 1 and 2, which is internally, but the scope 3. The scope 3 is the upstream, downstream, the carbon emission of our partner. I say that because it's a manner to change the mind. The company, because they have to do their carbon emission footprint, they have to understand better what's happened in the supplier side. They understand better how we use their own product. And with that, at this stage, perhaps for many companies only about carbon, it's a manner to understand a new link between the large worldwide company and the partners. And because we are able to do that about carbon, we have to take care to many things that happens in our partners. If you had in another end the new regulation, and for example in Europe the CS3D about the duty of vigilance, which is when you are in the middle of the value chain, you are responsible about what's happened for you in the value chain. You have this position plus another that I will express, which are together a good news about the discussion where we are. The another topic, which is a good contribution to the place where we are, it's the just transition. Now, when we are speaking about transition, we are speaking about just transition. Some of you are younger than the others, but if we were here 5 years ago, never you had somewhere with the topic of just transition. Perhaps today it's an evidence, but just previously we were speaking about the transition, carbon transition, energy transition, the word just transition, and the fact that we have to understand that it's not possible to organize and to accelerate the transition if we don't embark the poor people, or if we don't embark everybody, only because we have a new technical solution and because the architecture of the VVIP in public sector and in private sector agree, it's not enough to progress. And perhaps the opposite is the reality, and we know that especially in France. Just these three topics together are a new game about responsibility for the big worldwide company. In this game, after COVID crisis and the archipelization in English, mosaic of the reality today. We are no more a global world. We are a world. Huh? We need to be local. We need to produce locally your product, and then we have to change the mindset. I'm a worldwide company. I would like to have a worldwide suppliers. I don't care to the local. I put on the market the same products everywhere. No, it's not true. The people would like to buy local. At the beginning, about food, but now, for many, many things, for good or bad reasons, but it's the reality. When we have to produce to sell locally what we buy locally, we need to change the supply chain, and we need to have another vision. Just to finish and to express, it's not only a question of vision for Schneider Electric. We have two KPIs. In Schneider Electric, we manage sustainability at the top level by a set of KPIs. So you can see this set of KPIs on you can write Schneider Sustainability Impact News. When you have Schneider Sustainability Impact, each quarter you have the results of the main goals that we have for 5 years. Today we have in a barometer 2020-2025 with 11 components. Is not a lot, but if we would like to progress, to push, to accelerate about something and to embark all the people around the world, we need to be clear and to have choice, not to publish 400 data without any understanding. Two of these KPIs are, the first is, we would like...
Well, actually, I wanted to...
finish.
Sure,
would
please.
like to finish. We would like to support our suppliers to reduce by half their carbon emission in 5 years, and we are active for that. And the second, we would like to ask our 10,000 biggest suppliers to provide a decent work to their own employees. It's a question of living wage, social
Well, I would
coverage,
actually
etc.
we're running
Just to
out of
demonstrate that we can go into
time.
detail about the topic.
Yes, I would like to just ask a question. One thing that several of you all of you have actually brought up is sort of the difficulty of this gap between large companies and small companies, and rules that are made at a very high level, and the follow through of those levels, and how difficult the reality of those levels on the ground can be. I'm wondering what some of the solutions that you've seen are, or some of the things that have worked, some of the obstacles. I mean, Marike, you were saying sometimes the carrot is more effective than the stick, or potentially just this idea of unintended consequences when you do make rules at a higher level, and then sort of they trickle down to the ground. So if anyone would like to just jump in and with examples they've seen or potential problems that were unnoticed.
No, I do think it's not something that we start today. I do think wherever we see risk, if it's in the south or in the north, you address risks. So there's a lot of learnings we should take into account. If you see on the food farming level, I would say climate would be number one. And it's not that addressing climate starts today. Smallholders have been addressing climate all their lives. If you are hit by climate change, you cannot simply sit down. You need to act on it. So I do think small companies, as well as big companies, we don't have been passive agents. We haven't solved all of the issues, but there's a lot of learnings we can learn. Farmers have been diversified their crop, have been also going local instead of only being global. We are trying to walk away of being producers of primary goods. We are trying to add value. We are very much focused on getting back soil health into our production, because through all the chemicals we have been used for several reasons, to get more productivity, to get more income. We need now to turn this back and get it where we started many years ago, more sustainable food production, and the knowledge is still there. There's a lot of knowledge where we should make best use of. And also with regard of human rights, I do think human rights is difficult. I think we need to create more awareness. If you go to the south, if you talk about in the Dominican Republic that a child cannot use a machete because this would be the worst form of child labor, I don't think nor the child nor the parent won't understand that, and they didn't know that it's the worst form of child labor. So there is a lot of, because their parents did it, their grandparents did it, so why is it bad, no? So I do think we need to, and why is working bad? Or how can we find a way around it, because we need to survive. So there's a lot of work we are doing at smallholder level, small business level, to create this awareness, to find proper solutions, to avoid the worst form of child labor, to make also sure that the child still can work on the family farm, but also go to school. So I do think there is a lot of learning how we can move forward, even if it's not child labor free or deforestation free from now to tomorrow, but there is a good progress we can make. And I would advocate, as you, that let's sit together, let's talk, let's be transparent, and let's make best use of all these expertise and goodwill we are finding in the world to move forwards, and that we need to see in the SDGs too. I do think we don't make enough progress because we don't talk. Enough.
And Fiona, I'd love your thoughts about how to possibly avoid situations like unintended consequences like the Nestle situation. I mean, Gilles was making the point that it's much easier now with digital for those connections to be made.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering maybe what some possible solutions are.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to touch on 2 or 3 things that link in very much. ITC this year has published a Green Moonshot, where we are sort of aiming for the moon on sustainability, but trying to bring small businesses with us. And there were just 3 or 4 things that I'll highlight from that. I mean, one is this point that I made around voice, and bringing voice of small businesses to the table. Whether that's around negotiations, also we're going to be bringing small businesses to COP to try and ground in the reality of what does it mean, what does sustainability look like through the perspective of a small business trying to comply. So one is that, to try and shape, to try and influence, to give voice to, you know, how to make this work and how to build on the positives and mitigate the negatives. So I think that's really important, and linking into that, then trying to make sure that policies have a implementation focus, which takes into account the needs of how this will be made to work for small business, rather than destroy trade with small business. So there's that kind of macro level. Then there's what I would call the connecting level. That's around connection and information. So coming into this is our kind of sustainability map. Also work we've been doing with the US government on a climate smart network, where we're trying to showcase businesses that have climate credentials, and give them the opportunity to connect with buyers. So there's a kind of connecting piece needed, and digital is creating a lot of opportunities to do that better. And then the third is the more hands-on work at the level of the enterprises to help them adapt. And that, I think, is something that is a critical part of the story, you know, where ITC plays a role, but others organizations play a role, where businesses can play a role through their supply chain engagement around helping businesses to adapt and to conform and to comply. And to do that, we need financing. And that is the other piece, I think, in our jigsaw, is how do we harness all the new financing in the climate space to actually support small businesses to help them to adapt and mitigate the impact of climate.
This is perfect. I can build on it. No, fully agree. I think really from our side, finance is really critical. I've just seen the latest reports coming out, 1.6 trillion of trade finance gap, so millions of SMEs don't have access to global supply chains because of this lack of finance. And I think this is really where we, as ICC, started thinking around it and started working with leading trade finance banks to build the first framework to what does sustainable trade finance mean. A lot working together with the ITC as well on the standards. So now building this framework together with corporates and banks, and we'll launch it at COP. Already did a very simple one last year, and now have a really fully fledged framework this year. And we really see that there is an opportunity to more and more align the trade finance market with the Paris Agreement and the SDGs. And the second point I was just wanted to build on as well is, of course, this dialogue between small businesses, bringing them into this UN discussion, in particular around COP, I think is very important. So we have, as ICC, a important role there as the focal point for business, so the business voice, and are working with you as well for this year's Trade House, that together with WTO UNCTAD, and we'll also host the first ever SME Day at the ICC space. So I really hope that you will all join us for this discussion. I think it's a very important one to bring really these critical voices into the UNFCCC negotiations. I think it's really now it's time that negotiators start also taking these realities into their thinking when they negotiate these critical outcomes. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, we did want to save time for a couple of questions. So if anybody has a question for any of our panelists, raise your hand. Jump up. Yes.
Hi. Thank you for today's discussion. So my role is private sector lead for the UN Arrest and Coordinator System. All of the discussions and solutions you mentioned really are very helpful as I look at the country's situation. So there are a couple of things I want to mention and also ask for your advice. Number one, to the global south, I see the view they have is that the trade-offs among their population and business is different from the global north. Meaning when you have child labor, the family is relying on the child for the income. So they are not really considering the health, because without the income, there's no health and there's no livelihood, right? So I think that's actually the challenge in not just in small business, but also in AI, in a lot of issues, is the trade-offs are different for different countries and populations. And that links to my question, which is the other thing I also see, as you mentioned, that capital is super important. Big corporations have the capital to wiggle around, to capital to transition. Small business, there's one change, they're gone. And in a lot of small island countries or landlocked countries, SMEs is the only way of GDP growth, and trade is the only way of having some hope for their livelihood and trade. So my question is that how some of you mentioned that you support your partners or your supply chains, suppliers with some concrete solution. So I wonder what are the things you've done, not just setting standard for them, but something helpful for others to learn to do the same way. That's number one. Number two is that what do you think trade organization like yours or government can do to facilitate this type of discussion? Meaning, for instance, in Fiji, the government says, we want big corporations to work with our SMEs. We just don't know where to start and what we can do. So what would be the advice that you give to the governments? Over.
Do you want to do a few questions, or are we just doing, we've only got time for one?
No, does anyone have a response?
Yeah, I can
Yes, everybody jump in if you've got thoughts, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of what we're doing, as I said, we have things like a sustainability, a kind of public good, which provides a lot of information around standards, what's required in different areas that relate to both green, but also to areas like human rights. So that, part of that is about information and getting people to understand what the kind of various standards are. And we're beginning to also adapt that where we're seeing new regulations coming in. So there's resources that can be used by small businesses, by governments, by different actors along the value chain. What we're also doing in some sectors is much more concrete hands-on work through projects, often funded through partners, in fact, quite a lot funded through the EU in areas like textiles and agriculture, where we're actually working with businesses to help them to adapt climate-smart approaches. And that those then lead them to be able to comply with the standards, that lead them to be able to promote themselves as climate smart. But I think part of that is coming to your point about working with communities, and I think this, probably Marika and the Fair Trade movement is particularly adept at this, is about working with communities to find solutions that work locally for those communities, and then applying, you know, a strategy to be able to promote them through and connect them into supply chains in a way that works for them. So there does have to be very local, a localized approach. But governments, I think, and this is where I think the real challenge is, and around dialogue, and we're beginning to do some projects around climate competitiveness, where we're working also with governments to identify what some of the policy levers might be, the things they need to change, but also connecting up with the business environment. So the ecosystem, the business support organizations, for different industries, for small business, you need to also bring them along and start creating the services and the capacity so they can support the small businesses. We can't do it all as an ITC or as a ICC. It has to be embedded in the local systems. But those different levels, I think, are where we can really make a difference.
Okay, I think we have to wrap up. But anyway, please thank our wonderful panelists for their sharing their thoughts and questions and experiences. And now we have a moment for a fireside chat, unlocking the potential of youth entrepreneurs and innovation. Thank you, everyone.
Check, can you hear me? All right, okay. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this morning. Thank you for ITC for your partnership and DCIU for facilitating this important conversation. So I'm going to start. I have this great quote by an Irish playwright, George Bernard Shaw, to describe what these two folks are all about. I got it from, we have a partner called The Unreasonable Group, and the quote goes, "The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable men and women." Okay? And so, with that kind of conversation, I was actually honored when they asked me to do this, because these are youthful people, but that's the last thing I am. But the energy that I could get from this conversation would be awesome. I'm going to start off by first kind of allow them to introduce themselves. This is a panel of champions, okay? Both of them are been picked as the Youth Ecopreneur Awards. So I'd love for them to give their own introductions about who they are and what their businesses, their green businesses are, and how that is connected to the kind of the global sustainability agenda, and how it is winning the award meant to you in terms of your progression.
Thank you. First of all, it's a great honor to be here. Thank you for the International Trade Center and the YEI community for giving us this opportunity and this platform to be sitting in front of you and next to this gentleman. It is, again, the energy in New York is amazing. So my name is Ayungirish Mukhbat. I come from Mongolia, a country of 3.4 million. It's a landlocked country, and I am youth and a woman, and it's the best time to be in an SME as a woman and youth in history, I believe. So I make air filters from sheep wool in one of the most air polluted capitals in the world. And we have a lot of herders, basically nomads, as 20% of our population who are climate vulnerable. And these people lose their livestock in these extreme snowstorms, and they come to the city and they start burning coal to stay warm because we have the coldest capital in the world. And to survive this air pollution problem, they are creating more air pollution, but also they have to survive through it. And that's where we come in, where we're providing affordable air purifiers, but the filters that we use already are synthetic. So the synthetic filters become unrecyclable, and at the end we even burn them, creating even more problems. So basically, in short, we provide filter manufacturers. We have a B2B model. We provide filter manufacturers with these raw materials so that they can put it in various different applications, and we can have a world without air purifier devices, but our systems are already supporting healthy, clean air.
Hi everyone, this is Mashroor Hussain. I'm from Bangladesh, and I run a company, an agricultural information tech company called iPage Global. So my company empowered the small farmer to understand their soil, their weather, and help them plan to produce their crops accordingly. So the reason of me starting a company like this is something deeply rooted within my background. So I'm from a farmer's family. The year I born, the Bangladesh was hit by one of the Scarcia cyclone, and that caused landslide, for which my family, my farmer-based family, got dislocated, and my parents moved out. They almost lost everything, and then eventually they got out of the profession they were in. I'm the only kid in my family who has gotten out of the farming profession. From my childhood, I was inspired to get engaged with everything else, but not with agriculture, because my parents didn't see any future for me. And trust me, being in the seventh most climate vulnerable nation in the world, Bangladesh. So being in that country, it is so challenging to stick to farming profession. That's why I was inspired to get engaged with everything else, but not with agriculture. But eventually I got back to it. So in helping the farmer to make informed decision, it is a challenge. Climate change is a challenge for the farmer, and helping them to adapt to it, to the climate change is another challenge. You know, when we talk about helping the farmer to understand their soil by our proprietary soil testing technology, they usually say that, oh no, we know about it, so you don't have to teach us how to do it. When we talk about, hey, you need to understand your weather before applying pesticides or the diseases, oh yeah, we have been doing it for generations, you don't have to teach it. I have seen that my paternal uncles, my old cousins, they do the same. And when you come with something data-driven, tech-driven, they will have hard time believing into it. This is what we call the ethnographic challenge. And SMEs like ours who are working and supporting small farmers, marginal communities like farmer, fishermen, into the adaptation of climate change, we all have one common problem. Our target groups have difficulties to understand what we want them to do, but without even knowing, they're standing in the front line of climate change. That's why we are fighting, and this fight is universal.
Great. So now let's focus a little bit on the youth element. Both of you are thriving in the environment that you come in, but I'm not sure if So what are the challenges, the unique challenges that you think young people who would like to be more unreasonable, in essence, trying to change the world, change the landscape, especially in this emergency of climate, what do you think are the things that are, that young people are struggling with? This is kind of a call for you to talk to policymakers or folks who could create the enabling environment for that to happen.
Yeah, want me to go? So one common challenge that I have already talked about in another session here in the UNGA. So how do I say it? It's not about the deficiency of finance, you know? The finance is there. Lots of development finance, climate finance are there. It's about the policy that channel that finance to the qualified and the right entrepreneurs. That is what we are missing. And for this challenge, entrepreneurs like us, we have very little spaces to go. For example, the governments have designed so much programs for financing this kind of projects or startups, but those policies are unclear. And because of that, usually what happens, we have to go to that traditional financing process, like the banks. And the banks definitely will not be seeing any value in supporting farmers to train them. So they would be asking for money from day one, right? So we can go there. There are development finances, but the development finances require the mandatory participation of public sector. Engagement of private sector requires public sector be also engaged. Well, guys, that strategy might have worked in the past, but going down further, this is not helping, because when we make the participation of public sector mandatory in the process of routing development finance to the right SMEs, there are roadblocks. There is no definitive instruments or policy or benchmark of identifying the qualified SMEs for the governments. So they usually try to do this thing in a more traditional manner, and for which we'll be in trouble. There are venture capitalists, but then again, they are venture capitalists. So they are private fund, and they need accountability. So helping marginal communities like farmers requires time, patience, and we need policy for long-term patient finance. So this is a very common challenge that I think even Oyuka is also facing here.
Yeah, finance, we've been talking a lot about it at the UNGA. I've been complaining a lot because it is, I think everyone else is also complaining. So I think for youth and also for SDGs, I always like saying youth have that stupid bravery. We have that energy, but also more importantly, that stupid bravery. And I think we want others to have that stupid bravery as well, where Marika was also mentioning, like, everybody wants to be risk-free. I get that. But also, like, we need a lot of more risk takers, institutional risk takers, as you have a lot in the US actually, but maybe not in the global South. Not a lot of people are willing to take a chance on us in the South. Or, I mean, I'm technically not in the South, but I identify as the South. And so we do have a lack of access to opportunities. We do already need a lot of capacity building to access these financing. But like, the government and the institutions need to actually build their own capacities to enable that. So when we're talking about like lack of ecosystems and lack of infrastructure, these are real problems. So we don't have academia who are capacitated enough. We don't have industries who are big enough. We have a 3.4 million market. It's tiny. It's not even like as big as New York. It's like less than half of New York. That's kind of the market that we're working at, and more than half of the world countries are have a population below 10 million, which means that they need to scale outside their markets, like firsthand, to be able to scale. And to achieve the SDGs, we need youth, but also like we need these micro businesses in developing economies to take the leap and go into the SME status, but we are unable to make that because we have that like lack of capital, but also lack of education, lack of enabling ecosystems. Our investors don't have the education, let alone for financing. Like, we don't have investors talking the impact or the SDG languages. When we're saying we reduce plastic waste, that maybe makes sense, but when we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions, scope 3, they're just like blank. So we need all of this investor education to happen in the developed world, in the developing world, and that needs to be one. Secondly, I don't know how to make this happen, but like, we need more money in STEM, building STEM infrastructure. So, for instance, our company is an intellectual property-based company. It's a science-based company where we are manufacturing all these new innovative products, but for us to test and let alone to deploy, we need to, like, for instance, for us, we had to spend $1,500 and 2 months to send our test sample product to Korea, have it tested and give us a result. And maybe we don't like that result, so we have to like innovate here again without a lab and then send it back again. So imagine the amount of time and resources that we can save if we had these in-house or at least regional like capacities that we can access, you know. So I feel like there's a lot of like disproportionate amount of opportunities in Central Asia more than any others as well. So that would be really nice to have.
That's great. So let me then talk a little bit about, this is the Good Trade Summit. So let's talk a little bit about trade. I'm glad you mentioned how small Mongolia's population is. And I can attest to you, I did my thesis in Bangladesh, in Jalipur and in Dhaka. And they have population, right? So in a sense, how do you, because we're talking about trade, how do we facilitate your products being exported to Bangladesh or any other market in that sense? Is that, what are the trade barriers that you feel, if you want to grow beyond the 3.5 million people you're trying to serve, what are there barriers to entry that you feel, whether it's the capacities that you're talking about? I'm just uniquely would love to hear about the barrier to trade and you being a young entrepreneur, a startup coming up.
Yeah. For us, the challenge we're facing right now is the cost of capital. We're manufacturers, so capital intensive. For us to set up a scale that can supply a market such as Bangladesh or any other country with over 100 million thank you. So for us to have that sort of scale, we need a lot of capital. And the cost of capital in Mongolia is extremely expensive because it's harder to have many rich people in a smaller market. And that is actually like, we only have 3 decades of democracy and private capital, you know. So for us, that's a bit of a challenge. Like the $100,000 here versus in Mongolia is a very different estimate of, you know, like value, firstly. But secondly, we need a lot of expertise in terms of legals, in terms of markets, how to like study them, how to enter them. These are really big challenges that like we need those studies. And like, for instance, if I were to enter Bangladesh, if I were to study the market studies itself cost a lot. We don't have the resources to conduct that study. We don't have the money to buy the market study, let alone do the legal due diligences and things like that. But for instance, we were, thanks to the Youth Ecopreneur Awards, we were able to get pro bono support from Sidley Austin, which is a multinational law firm. And so like all of these legal services and other like market specific trade related expertises that are either free or enabled to us through the program is super helpful. And we believe that like all of these expertises are aided by our mentors. So we've been lucky enough to participate in international accelerators and incubators over the last 2 years. And we've had access to some mentors who were like heading international export strategies for different companies, and all of these people working for the U.S. Department of State of Agriculture and stuff. So like all of these people, all of the advisors that we have who are very impact oriented, like these individuals really care about SDGs, about you, and it's really nice to have this community of people who want to support this change. So I would say, like, if you have any sort of expertise, please sign up and volunteer for these accelerators and help entrepreneurs like us, because that means a lot to us, and that means a lot for the world in general.
To add to what Oyuka just said, I think to make it happen, a cross-border trade to be happening in the hands of the entrepreneurs or startups, I think I am missing one particular instrument here, which is an unified dashboard or a platform where we could share what we have been doing in our country and how we can transfer that innovation to other countries. And that dashboard, or maybe we can talk about a platform, could facilitate in the presentation of our solution, which market it targets, which can be extended to, and then it can also exhibit real-time data on the impact that it is creating in its origin of innovation. That is something missing. Well, platforms like Yay Community is giving us the scope of coming here and talking about this, and thanks to BCIU as well. But can this be a combined platform, like the innovators from Global South will be presenting their portfolio, and then they would be reaching out to potential market as they think they can be expanding to? This instrument is not there. There are lots of platforms, there are lots of organizations, and they need to be coming together to exhibit what we are doing, to understand our innovation, and identify the scope of scalability to other borders. So that is what I'm missing.
Beautiful. Second question I have for you, as entrepreneurs who are creating and growing businesses, one of the most, there's a lot of talk about entrepreneurship, like sexy, people talk about it. But when you look at failure rates and the number of people who actually pursue it is very small. But there is a missing part about workforce development, meaning like the folks who work for folks like you, which are 1 to 10 kind of ratio. I'm wondering, do you face workforce challenges in a sense of finding capable folks who could work on, especially for you in the IP side and for you also in the technology side? Do you have any commentary around young people who not only need to be striving to be entrepreneurs, but to be amazing workers so they can contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals?
So I often say this thing in this way. The first challenging task for a startup or SME founder is to convince an investor, and then convince workforce to work for them.
Okay.
So because these SMEs or startups, this ecosystem is new to different economies, and young professionals who wants to have a stable job, right? They want to be a part of big names, and we are not yet there. So that's a challenge. Yeah, of course. So and in the process of retaining talent, we need more of capacity building within the management of the SMEs, because we are not expert in management of human resource. Like, I am from an engineering background, then eventually went for a government job, then quit it, then eventually got into agriculture. So I wasn't being trained to handle talents, even cross-border. So we need that kind of capacity building support, right? And definitely this is a challenge. Another challenge in the same sector we have often experienced, the quality, the retention is definitely a challenge, and then the down the line, the flow of supply of qualified talents within the company will become a challenge. So either you train somebody, they will be working for you, and then after 5 years they will be getting out with lots of experience, and then you have to start from day one. This is a challenge. We don't know how to face it. We don't know how to deal it. So perhaps communities like this can help us in dealing that.
Yeah, for us, of course, capacity building is an issue. I don't think it's not an issue in any part of the world. Everyone, everywhere, in every sector is facing capacity building issues. And I think this speaks to the leaving no one behind agenda, where we've recognized that we have left so many behind, that we actually have to spend money now to capacitate them. I was in India last December, and I was like awe-inspired by like Infosys and like all of these large corporations who have built large, significant campuses around the whole country to train their workers for like 6 months at least to have them work. But like we come nowhere near, so we don't have that even for our large corporations, and we have less and less people actually studying STEM because we don't have the labs, as I said. We don't have that infrastructure. We don't have the government spending going into R&D. So we're not having more people educated in these STEM fields, which is very counterintuitive. You hear all these people like, you have to do STEM, but it's not really happening. We need more money in education. We need more money in R&D to support that. Secondly, we have a lot of brain drain happening in Mongolia, as is happening in a lot of developing economies, where the smart and bright of us all end up coming to New York, for instance, and start working for these companies and or development organizations where they promise better pay, better stability, better opportunities, and so like to even convince my friend who's in the States to come back to Mongolia. Maybe she believes in our vision, but she doesn't believe in Mongolia, for instance. She can't stand the quality of life in Mongolia. That's a real challenge. Like, it's hard to convince people to just come back and work. So brain drain is preventing us from soaring in many ways. I think there needs to be more college level, like these, what are these called? I forgot the name, but the training institutes, vocational training institutes to scale up their game and like update their curriculum according to the SDG agendas. So if we're looking at energy auditors, if we're looking at these, maybe not university level, like higher level education, but maybe not like high school education. So we need more of these people in between so that we can have the workforce and capacity that is required to scale.
Great. So for you specifically, I know you've been advocating or highlighting the need to mainstream sustainability in businesses. So how can you make the business case for inclusive trade and business practices and enterprises?
Yeah, I mean, sustainability makes sense. Generally, for us, we are a social enterprise, so we're working with, we're supporting herders' livelihoods, we're supporting families who are not able to breathe clean air affordably, which, it's a basic human right, you would think, but unfortunately not so. But also on the sustainability side of things, we have traceable wool, which means that you are able to track which farmer in which province grew that sheep or had that sheep, and we're able to track how much carbon footprint it has been accumulating over the years, and we are able to also do later life cycle assessments so that it can prove that it has that it is biodegradable, one, but also it has a low carbon footprint so that we can access different markets who care about sustainability, who might potentially pay for the green premiums. Because I feel like right now the green premiums are too high and not a lot of buyers in developing economies are willing to pay for that. So like you need people in developed economies who are willing to pay the green premium. But we are having that, as the previous panel also mentioned, we are having that problem going to those developed economies because they have such like tightening regulations and all of these things. We don't, it takes a while for us to build that capacity to try to enter those markets. You know, we have to be very, very, very smart about it. And that, yeah, again, we just have to rely on a lot of advisories and all of that to prove and validate. We need to build credibility from third parties. Yeah.
Brief. Yep.
I think Oyuka has made a fair point in there, so I'm not going to answer the same way. But if you allow me, I was just thinking of asking you one question.
Sure.
So we know that you are agroeconomist.
Yep.
So you have been working in agriculture and understanding the economical side of that. So I was just thinking, what is the State Department is doing or designing to support entrepreneurs like us who are working for agriculture or helping the marginal community to become more resilient towards climate change, and how you are devising strategies in supporting young people like us. So that's the question.
Love the hustle. I didn't expect that, but I'll go with it. Thank you for asking that question. First, I studied AgriCon, but I have not practiced this in a while, but I'm passionate for it. But yeah, we do have programs, and one of the programs we even have with ITC is the Climate Smart Network, which is a platform that they're creating, is a testament to. But the one most relevant one is we have this thing called the Coalition for Climate Entrepreneurs. You and I had a brief conversation about that, where we're creating these climate hubs around the world. We have one in Ghana. We're about to open up one in Morocco, and Vietnam, and in Latin America, and other places. So we believe, truly believe, I meant what I said earlier about the unreasonable element of it, is that the only way the climate status quo needs to be disrupted is by folks like you. And then how do we give you unfair advantage for you to do those things? So we are working with likes of Salesforce, GE, ARM, and big organizations, big companies, and ITC to essentially provide all the tools that we need for you guys. Because you guys are the superheroes. We're just the Robins, in a sense. We're like the support system for it. So I think there are great programs like the other. Since you've asked, I'm going to plug in another one. We have a program called Unreasonable Goals, which is a group called Unreasonable Group that invests and supports venture social enterprises that are kind of have the aim to touch all of the sustainable development, the 16 development goals, the 17 being partnerships we're at. There's actually happening in Costa Rica now in a couple of weeks. So I would love to connect you to that grid in a way you get the support system that you need. But we do walk the talk. We don't just talk about why these things are there. We actually provide our muscle and our resources and network to provide things like that. So I think that's the way the department, and not just it's the department, but USAID, DFC, and all the other organizations that US government tools that we can provide on those kind of things. But I can't thank you enough. You actually inspired me that there is life after, you work with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. There is cool life afterwards. So, and I appreciate that. And I just want to thank you. I know we're running out of time for all that you do in a sense. But the other thing I would like for you to take responsibility for is that the door and the window has opened for you. How do you keep that window open for folks behind you, right? There's a lot more folks behind you, however small your population might be, and I know it's a mighty one. There's a lot of young folks who want to be like you. You want to be their diplomat. You want to be their, door opener. So make sure that you don't just shine, but you want your light not to dim, but to be brighter. And the only way you can get that power is through people, and I hope you do that. And so thank you, everybody, for joining us on this conference.
Thank you so much.
All right, that was wonderful. It is time for our second panel, From Policy to Practice, Empowering Business to Drive the SDG Agenda.
Hi.
Oh, great, everybody's already. There's not an order, no. I think just anywhere that you feel inspired to sit. Yes, that is mine. Thank you. All right, I think we are ready to get started. We'll talk for a little bit and then we'll try to leave some time for questions at the end. So if you have something that is coming up in your brain, hold on to it, and we can hopefully get to that at the end. We have a really wonderful panel of people to sort of continue the discussion from panel one and hopefully deepen it a little bit. We've got Tony Lynn Lin, Chief of Programs at the United Nations Global Compact, Agnes Deskowitz, Chief Operating Officer at the U.S. Development Finance Corporation, Jeffrey Tim, Organic Production Specialist, Global Organic Textile Standards, and Joshua Dixon, Vice President of Corporate and Business Development at Valmont Industries. Thank you, everybody. Agnes, I would love to start with you. In the earlier panel, one of the things we talked about was some of the obstacles and also the opportunities of trying to develop sustainability practices in emerging markets, and both kind of the opportunities that are there, but also some of the challenges of making sort of high-level decisions that then trickle down to very real life circumstances on the ground. What do you see as some of kind of the primary things that need to be addressed, and maybe some examples of successes or failures that you think particularly illustrate some of these issues?
Thank you, and really a huge thanks to ITC and BCIU for organizing this fantastic panel. Really happy to be here with all of you. For those of you who may not know, DFC is the U.S. government's development finance organization. We're active all over the globe in emerging markets. We offer all kinds of financing, so I won't go into that. I think a lot of you are probably familiar with us. But what I did want to say is that we're very committed to Biden administration agenda of addressing issues of climate change, and that for us means across the board. So, for example, in some of our larger projects and larger investments, we help the investees assess their climate risks and address them. But I think where really a lot more work is needed is around the smaller types of projects and types of investments. I had the pleasure yesterday of, actually 2 days ago, of hearing a mayor from the first female mayor in the Gambia speak. And she really was incredibly powerful when she was describing the challenges that the women in her city face because of climate change. She basically said, we plant, we wait for something to grow, it gets destroyed, we plant again. And what she basically said is, we need financing, but what we really need is information and tools to address what we're dealing with. So I feel that really building resilience and building the right kind of approaches is not just about providing financing for SMEs and thinking of how do we make sure that they're growing and that they're creating jobs. But it's also about how do we get to those smaller businesses, to those stakeholders at the base of the pyramid, and help them address these risks as well, not just the large projects and large companies. So that for me, it was a really huge eye-opening moment, and I think that's where, when you were asking about challenges, that's really where the challenge is.
Well, Tony Lynn, I'm wondering if you can speak to this a little bit. In the private sector, what are some of the ways to get small businesses involved, and it's sometimes hard to tell if they're on, to get small businesses involved, and also to make it realistic for them, or maybe even incentivize them to change practices, to have more sustainable practices?
Thank you very much. We at the UN Global Compact are certainly happy to be here, especially this panel from policy to action, because we're really about that. So for those of you who are learning about us for the first time, I mean, we're the largest corporate sustainability initiative. Our mandate is really to unite businesses and link them to the development agenda. Yeah. So we need to do that at scale, and as you know, the urgency of which we need to do that is really very apparent as of now, and this is what's shaping the discussions of UNGA. So your question on how do we involve small businesses for information, out of the about 19,000 companies that are members of the Global Compact, a significant portion of that are small and medium enterprises. Of course, I mean, we could always say that SMEs are defined differently across countries, but nonetheless, we work a lot with them. So first, through the influence of the supply chain. That's number one, because we have a lot of multinational and large companies that are willing to craft. They are already leaders to craft their sustainability paths, but also they are very much interested now to see how their supply chains can also follow suit. Because now they are under pressure to report more on the performance of the supply chain, especially on the climate side, for example. And we're also looking at now new areas like biodiversity initiatives. So to deliver on those, these large companies necessarily have to look after the supply chain. So that's how we try to influence. But this is not to say that we cannot also influence directly the SMEs to come on board. So we're now looking at, I mean, the Secretary General certainly has also called upon how SMEs can be more having a leading role in terms of advising, in terms of improving the financial architecture, because the access to finance is certainly something that's challenging in terms of SME action towards the SDGs. So also at the Global Compact, we are trying to see how we can position SME leaders to amplify their voices, to discuss about issues. We already heard about some policy impediments in the earlier panels today. So how do we get them to the table to also bring out their issues? So that's one. And I also talked about already financing. We'll look at some financing strategies across supply chains, and also as our role in terms of aligning corporate finance towards the Sustainable Development Goals. And we have an eye on those who are most vulnerable, and in our case, it would be the smaller businesses in the chain. So those are the main elements under which we address SME issues and bring them into the sustainability pathway. Yeah.
What about, Jeffrey, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the role of technology and digitization in maybe helping to enable that to happen, both for small businesses, but also for large businesses, and just helping businesses in general kind of get to sustainability goals.
Absolutely. Yes. So for those who don't know, the Global Organic Textile Standard strives to provide traceability for those sustainability goals of ecological and social responsibility. And one of the things we've been working on is the digitization of, a tried and true chain of custody programs to actually trace products from a farmer to, the retail. And I think one thing for sure that we strive to provide as a standard is the ability for small, medium enterprises to participate in that global supply chain. So traceability can be rather expensive. And so one of the strategies for us is to really reduce the costs to participate in the sustainability, traceability for small and medium enterprises.
Do you mind giving us an example of how that happens? Is there like a program that is helpful in that way, or how does that actually, how do you achieve that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the programs that we've been developing now is called the Global Trace Base, which is originally designed to trace organic cotton or wool from the farmer through the various stages of processing in textile production to the end consumer. But that platform has been developed to be also applicable to other materials. So maybe it'll be used for lithium traceability when the time comes, or other standards could also be using this platform. And for us, it's been key that we've been investing in it through public funds from especially the German government, and so for us then the operation will then be at cost. So it's we believe that sustainability is a not-for-profit enterprise. that's key for us.
And Joshua, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your company's approach to sustainability and maybe some of the methods that you've been employing to help meet some of the sustainability goals that you have.
Yeah. So a couple years ago, when we, kind of got on the sustainability movement, we really realized, kind of what the other panelists said earlier, that it's important to understand our supply chain. It's important to understand, what all those, what our entire carbon footprint is. So to do that, we, went with a supplier management software, supplier management organization that really went out and kind of brought me back to my roots in operations. And we spent, kind of the way I was trained, working with Toyota a long time ago to cultivate those relationships and really try to help suppliers, giving them the carrot versus the stick to really improve themselves. And I think the other side of it is, by doing that, we've developed quite a few smaller, suppliers, smaller regional suppliers, because we are global. We operate in 95 different countries around the world. So finding local always helps, because it also reduces our carbon footprint for transportation, because we ship big, heavy steel around the world. So I think that was a big part of it. The other thing I will say is just our core business in agriculture is, by design, it's designed to create, and distribute wealth down through a country and through a population. And we've seen it time and time again. I mean, the number of our customers that are smallholders, small families, private businesses, and not megacorps. It really vitalizes and recharges me, because I can see that we're actually helping, not just self-sustaining farmers, but also, creating businesses around the world.
Are there any examples of carrots that you've seen work particularly well, or that you found sort of inspiring or illustrative of some of the issues that we're talking about?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, one of the things that we're trying to work on is decarbonization of different things. So we made a small investment in a carbon company that helps ranchers to adopt good practice, which allows them to do rotational grazing, sequester more carbon in their rangeland, and then that generates a carbon offset that they can go sell. And using blockchain, technology, so you can actually trace it from
They
birth.
sell carbon on the blockchain?
Yeah, birth to
Really?
Yeah, using blockchain technology
Wow.
to track it. So basically, they get a reward for doing the right thing, which, farmers are entrepreneurs and farmers are, environmentalists, because if they don't take care of the land, it's it can be a renewable resource, but if you don't take care of it, you can also destroy it. So so that gets some of that investment money back, which then, farmers are great at reinvesting. So these ranchers then go out and buy more land, do the same thing over again, buy, more efficient pumps for their water, for their livestock, et cetera. So.
Agnes, I'm wondering if any case studies are coming to mind for you in the way of development finance, or any lessons learned, I would say, like good examples, but also maybe mistakes that happened that you learned from.
I think a lot of the challenges that we see is really the kind of size of capital that's available versus the size of capital that can be used by a lot of the smaller enterprises. So banks are doing large loans, and really, once again, they're really addressing the needs of larger clients. And what we really try to do is, because we ourselves are a large investor, we try to invest through intermediaries, so through banks, to get them to lower their the size of their loan, or maybe not require as much collateral. So we provide guarantees to banks for certain sectors, for certain regions, to really encourage banks to start developing customers that are smaller, that are in the sectors that we are really trying to address, as well as funds, because small businesses can't just really thrive on debt. They really need much more patient capital, which is usually much more equity-like. So recently we invested in a fund called Novastar in Africa, which actually is trying to provide capital for locally made solutions to climate change. So whether it's better irrigation methods or other technologies. So we are really trying to kind of build an entire ecosystem of financing the solutions and financing to smaller businesses that doesn't actually exist in a lot of countries. The solutions that I've seen work well, as well, is in providing affordable services to small businesses. So, for example, we made an investment into Leap in India, which is building silos for grain storage that are then available to local communities. Because climate change is really disrupting a lot of traditional methods of storing, of transportation, and unless you make those available to communities, they will just not be able to profit from any of their hard work. So I think trying to figure out what the solutions are, trying to figure out how to provide financing for those solutions that will take the risk on those solutions, and 3, providing financing to the businesses themselves so that they can use those solutions that are available to them. I think that's kind of a trifecta, even though it's very difficult to achieve. But we have to build these ecosystems, otherwise we'll be in trouble.
Yeah. And Tony Lin, what do you see as the role of international partnerships in these kinds of goals? Because it does seem like getting down to a granular level is so important and can be difficult, but what about maybe like larger international partnerships too, sort of going up a bunch of levels?
Again, thank you for that question. So I'd like to start with a program that we have just launched yesterday, basically. It's called Forward Faster. So ITC, for example, is a supporter of this initiative of the UN Global Compact. And so here we are setting higher ambition and where we can accept also credibility in terms of committing to reaching certain targets in line with climate action, gender equality, living wage, water resilience, and finance and investment. So these are the areas where we see private sector being very well positioned to address the Sustainable Development Goals, and at the same time, where there will be multiplier effect, right? So to be able to do this, we certainly need a partnership around it where, number one, we can set standards, targets that are really measurable and where companies can easily relate to in terms of their progress. Number two, we needed organizations to, within the Global Compact, we have a communication on progress. It's a reporting system where companies would, report on annual progress along these targets. So the importance of partnership there of different players having their role on the technical standard setting, on the, how do you say, mobilizing the businesses, very important. So the next program is we have the Sustainable Supply Chain Impact Program, where we worked with a lot of large companies in their supply chains in driving sustainability. So basically, what we learned there is that businesses that work along the supply chain are better able to really achieve sustainability targets. That's very clear. But what we also learned is that these multinational companies, larger companies, have that opportunity then to understand better what are the challenges of the SMEs in the supply chain. So that partnership, number one, among businesses to discuss what are the issues, and number two, among SMEs to discuss, what are their main barriers and challenges. But on the other side of it, SMEs could also better achieve targets because, for example, we have targets on paying 100% living wage, paying 100% of employees living wage by a certain period. So because they are small, it's easier to reach 100% in that sense. And also because, for example, another target on setting science-based targets towards a net zero greenhouse gas emissions, since they are small, they have less emissions to attend to and can easily align and target. So again, partnership around that is very important to look at. And then a third program that we have is we launched in COP26, we launched a Think Lab on just transitions. And this Think Lab already developed some guidebooks. How do you help in terms of preparing in the future of work? How do you do that in a just manner? How do you pay the right wages? How do you address gender equality along this transition? So again, partnerships very important because we had to develop the toolkits, and at the same time we had to promote social dialogue. So we had to work with agencies like the ILO, how this is done together with employers, associations, and the unions as well. So very important how to, not just at the global level, I would say, but especially when we talk about SMEs, local level dialogue, public-private dialogue is also very important. So I would say, the global partnerships should enable the real partnerships that need to happen on the ground for action to take place. Yeah. So especially if we are to also address issues around SMEs.
One of the issues that came up during the first panel that I thought was so interesting, and I feel like it's come up in different ways right now too, is just this idea of the difficulty, the disconnect that can happen sometimes between who makes the rules and who has to follow the rules, and some of the unintended consequences that can happen, and some of the unexpected difficulties that can arise. Jeffrey, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about rules versus incentives, and how, maybe the role of both, because obviously both have drawbacks and both have advantages, and I would love to hear about some of the experiences that you've had in that area.
Absolutely, rules and incentives. For us, I think our attitude is that market access is a great incentive for small businesses and factories to really implement due diligence practices, to implement ecological and social responsibility in their production practices. Yes, we do require practices as we develop or as we evolve the GOTS standard from time to time. And now with GOTS version 7, for example, we do have, it's been made easier for companies who do get the GOTS certification to then also be adhering to due diligence requirements, for example. Certainly, the requirements or the legal requirements that are coming into place are signs of lofty goals. I think it's a great thing that that these requirements are coming out, but there is a major question of how can we make sure that small and medium enterprises especially don't get lost, don't get left behind. And so for us, it's really important to somehow at least provide a platform to make it accessible and feasible to comply and to adhere to these standards.
Joshua, you've worked with small farmers all over the world. What do you see in terms of rules versus incentives, and maybe also what do the farmers experience as in terms of meeting sustainability goals, caring about sustainability goals?
Sure. Immediately I think of Brazil. And Brazil gets a lot of Brazil ag gets a lot of attention these days, based on Amazon rainforest deforestation, and I can tell you I've been out in the field getting my boots dirty with a lot of those farmers, and they are very sophisticated business people, and like I said, they are the first environmentalists. They understand exactly what they can and can't do with their land. And it's not that they're scared of the government, but they're very aware. And if they have to remove a tree, they know that it either has to be relocated or replanted, or you have to replant 2 or 3 times the amount of trees. So they're very aware of it. They understand the rules. And again, it's back to the notion of their land is their resource. If they mismanage their land, they don't have a business, or their family doesn't have a business, or their grandchildren don't have a business. So I think rules are important, and I think they're much more sophisticated than I think people give them credit for. I've been to several places in sub-Saharan Africa as well, in the Sahel and in other areas in rural Sudan, where the same thing. I mean, they understand what a resource the Nile is, or what a resource the Nubian aquifer is, and they do the right things. at the right time.
I mean, on the other hand, sometimes small businesses and small farmers, the profit margins can get really thin, and sometimes complying with regulations or best practices cost a little more. How have you seen maybe businesses or farmers, this is to all of you, address that in a way that was successful? Because there is often a trade-off. It does often cost a little more money, or compliance can be hard, which is why I think sometimes rules are emphasized over incentives.
Maybe I'll just go first and then
Yep.
pass it on to my colleagues here. I think it's part of just the evolving landscape of business, and as capitalists, they need to understand that that's an input cost. I was on a panel yesterday talking about carbon, and somebody was asking me, so, how do you verify, and who absorbs the cost of the verification process? We dig pits, and it's very expensive and time consuming, and we put it right into our overhead. I mean, it's understood that this is the cost, and I think our prior panelist was talking about, being climate smart and the premium for green. Yeah. Again, it's kind of one of those absolutes. I don't think we're, it's like car insurance. I don't think you're going to be able to just not do it. And we, as businesses, we need to figure out how to help offset it, with these smallholders. If there's grant money available, if there's a way we can ease, with maybe ease them into it slowly. But I think eventually, everybody is just going to have to adopt it.
Yeah, I'd like to add that, ultimately, the consumer pays for the cost of sustainability. But how do we make sure that those premiums actually get back to the farmer, to the producer? It really has to do with traceability. And so, chain of custody, traceability, making sure that we know exactly where those products came from, back to the field, back to the farmer, back to the family. I think that's the reason that we develop these technologies and digital tools, to be able to make that traceability faster, more feasible, and less expensive.
Well, from our end, from a more general approach, a strategy has always been principles-based. Yeah. So whether it's large companies or SMEs, for that matter, it's always that adhering to these 10 principles is foundational. You cannot not do it in this day and age, because it means for you survival and thriving. So essentially for SMEs, survive and to access global markets, adherence to sustainability principles is imperative. So how do we manage in terms of their being cash-strapped? Financial resources are definitely not always available. So we always say that sustainability should not be seen as a cost element. But knowing, for example, that for SMEs, short-termism is more or less the perspective towards value addition. So we always say that sustainability is building on long-term value, and those businesses who can really achieve that would be those businesses that will succeed in the future. So that's why for the Global Compact, it's really we are helping the SMEs on how to adhere more to the 10 principles and to deliver on the SDGs. So this is just basically. But I mentioned already the partnership and the mechanisms by which we also help in terms of financing certain projects that they are embarking on. So this is for us.
Well, I think you may have partially answered this, but how do you help small business or a small farmer get to the long-termism as opposed to the short-term, like just trying to get through the year?
Well, it's not just us. The market is really pushing for that. The big customers are requiring that. Number one, their shareholders are also asking for this. So they really have to. It's not anymore a choice, but they really have to be into that. So number one. But we are, like at the Global Compact, we're all developing these guidance documents, as I mentioned to you, how to do that. We have business engagement modalities. We have academies. We have peer learning groups where they can, exchange. They can learn from each other, because SMEs would rather learn directly from other SMEs or businesses within their sector about these things. So that's what the Global Compact is basically investing on. These types of programs where more practical approaches for hand-holding the SMEs to get there. So we do have a lot of learning sessions and exchange mechanisms that that SMEs can, member SMEs, and especially those who can also maybe SMEs who are not members yet of the Global Compact can also look at for them to get guidance on these things.
Excellent. Well, I think we have time for a few questions, and yeah, we'd love to take some. I think we have a microphone. How about this gentleman in the blue, light blue, white?
Hi, I was just curious, from a sustainability standpoint, do you have evidence that consumers will pay more for sustainability, for example, with cotton? And I bring that up because, right now, farmers are the ones that, are the price takers and assume a lot of that risk. And, how farmers can't afford to do that. It's a relatively low margin business. You need to promote sustainability practices and things like that. But there's been debate in terms of who's actually paying for that cost. And, it ends up being the farmers in some cases. And frankly, they just can't afford it. And is there enough evidence, like you said, the consumer ultimately has to pay for it? Is there enough data there that's showing, yes, they will pay a premium in scale, not, when the economies are good?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the organic sector has demonstrated that for food, as well as for cosmetics and for textiles, that people are willing to pay more, realizing that the sustainability is is another aspect of quality. It's not just about fiber length and thread count. It's also about the longevity or the impact that one has on other people on the planet.
I guess I just also wanted to add to that. Has inflation impacted that appetite for consumers to pay more at all? Because it's definitely something that countries around the world are experiencing, and I'm just wondering if people have changed at all their behavior.
I mean, organic is a relatively small market, so I think the demographic that has decided that they are willing to pay and that this is important, that we don't see inflation actually causing a negative impact. I think there's bigger issues in terms of production that are causing a limited supply. I think that's a bigger issue.
Yeah, just to echo what my colleague here was saying, part of the reason why we're getting involved in ranching is because Amazon and Walmart, two of the biggest buyers of protein, are demanding access to climate smart protein, and they want it. They want to know, and that's why I wasn't going to get into it unless we were going to use a blockchain, so that we could trace it all the way back to when that animal was born and when it was harvested, and what practices were put into that. So absolutely, there's a market there, and consumers are asking their retailers to have this on the shelves.
And yes.
First of all, thank you very much for a great panel. I was a career American diplomat, most recent ambassador in Indonesia and assistant secretary for South and Central Asia. And we used to bend over backwards in the U.S. government to be as representative and as inclusive as possible in all of our events. One of the themes today has been integrating SMEs into standard setting and regulation setting and everything else. And obviously the SME sector around the world is this huge, diverse group of, and I wondered how the UN, for example, goes about. I mean, the SMEs themselves don't have the resources really to get involved in your processes. And so how do you sort of develop an inclusive group of SMEs that you can involve in standard setting, let's say? It's sort of, I just was wondering how that happens.
Thank you very much. So I mentioned already, for example, there is recognition from the UN Secretary General himself that SMEs need to have an advisory role in the international financial architecture, because we need to give them more access to finance, definitely. And for the Global Compact, it's really about aligning corporate finance to also finance SMEs along value chains. So that's the approach that we are taking. Secondly, for the Global Compact, so I mentioned that most of our members are actually small and medium enterprises. So we involve them in terms of now we're looking at how we can raise the voice of SME CEOs, SME leaders, basically, business owners, in raising that into the policy dialogue, policy platforms that are open to them, that they should be also be participating in. So regrettably, this has not happened in large scale yet, but we are really looking towards that. And second, our sustainable finance and investment strategy now needs to consider the supply chain and therefore SMEs along that line, because as I mentioned, our large multinationals have greater pressure to report on climate action along the supply chain. So for example, those large companies who have committed to our target on setting science-based, net zero transition plans necessarily have to look at scope 3. So for those of you who understand this strategy, they now have to look at the emissions from their supply chains. Yeah. So in some companies, this could be even the higher percentage. Some have 60-70% of emissions coming from the supply chain and only 30-40 from their own operations. So that in itself brings the voice of SMEs to the COPs and to the wider discussion. So therefore, we have now to tailor our products and our services from the Global Compact. As I mentioned, our guidance notes on just transition, climate action should now speak to also SMEs and guide them how to really participate in this whole process. So in those two strategies that I've mentioned, if you have further ideas how we can really involve them, because we understand that governments have large programs for SME development, yeah? And it's for us in the UN, international community, to augment that. How do we, for example, bring them to the same table? That's even just number one. And then also how do we get these programs to be accessible to SMEs, because I mean a lot of the SMEs are saying we know that there are so many financing schemes available to us, but it's really how do we even be how do you say credit worthy, or how our projects even be bankable? Can banks or these financing schemes just look at impact? Those questions have to be answered. So those are the areas that we're seeing where we can bring more involvement from the SMEs.
No, I was just going to say, local chambers of commerce around the world can help as well. We often rely on them. Most of them have SME branches that they work on.
Yes.
Hello,
yes.
It's Birbi Stuki from the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO. Hi, Tony. We used to be colleagues. So I'm heading the division of UNIDO that is responsible for sustainable supply chains. And my question relates to the global coordination of policies. And namely the current lack of coordination and its impacts in putting policies into practice. We know that there are many EU directives, regulations, many European countries are putting in place mandatory legislation. We know Japan, Australia, and so forth. And it might be that an SME, let's say in North Africa, who is supplying textiles for, let's say, automotive industry and textile industry, might have 10 different reporting requirements. And my question really is, who should take the role of global coordination of policies, whether it comes for traceability, interoperability, standards, definitions, and so forth? You can all answer that. Thank you.
No, that's a frustration we have all over the place. I mean, the last thing anybody wants is you book a big order and you find out you can't ship it because there's some compliance issue that just popped up. I mean, part of it is, as an organization, we have to be present in all these different regions. We have to pay attention to what's going on. And again, I mean, part of it is, coming from Nebraska, we have a phrase called Nebraska reasonableness. So it's sort of embracing common sense, trying to do the right thing. But in some cases, governments or organizations or things, really struggle with that. So I don't have a good answer for it other than it's a pain in the butt and you've got to be aware. And if you want to be on the global stage, it's kind of back to sustainability as a farmer or producer. You have to, that's the table stakes. You have to play. I wish it was easier. I wish there was a master book that we could go to that we could give to people, but we don't. But we can't give up, sorry.
That's the message.
I think this gentleman here had a question.
Yes, I do have a lot of questions, but Hi.
Yes.
Good, wonderful. Oh, thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for asking the question, first of all. I was thinking the same question. So my name is Chris. I am also a small business owner, as well as I used to work as a UN consultant for last 10 years. So I have a little bit actually complaint about this thing. I have a questions and complaint as well. UN Global Compact. I feel like you don't serve for the SMEs. You only serve for the big corporation. What I feel during high-level political forum and also during this General Assembly, I applied 2 times for years networking, even for the kind of with other businesses. And also the membership you mentioned, thousands, 1,000 you have with those. It's so hard for us, for a small business owner, SMEs, to become a member of your organizations. That's one thing, because it's only you guys select big corporation, so you're not helping at all for a small business or something like that. I mean, my personal feeling about it, because I've applied a couple of times. I never get into making network with other companies or like that, because it's not free. Also the membership, do you guys have any plan to change in the future? Because every time I go to the meeting like that, they say, oh, 90% of global economic backbone is small businesses. Even in the United States, over 85% based on small businesses. But when we go to... Yes, I'm going to question that. Do you guys have a global compact, any change in the future for small businesses in order to become a members, or help us to network with other companies with you have right now? That's one. And second thing, Ms. Angie, for the international finance thing, I know it's a newly established the agency in the US. Do you have your agency finance or lend the US-based companies? If not, answer, do you have any policies, the Global South or somewhere else outside, we can make a venture capital to get funding from your agencies? Thank you for time. Thank you for listening as well.
No, thank you. While I agree that there is a lot of room for our membership to be more inclusive, but over the years, this expansion, as I mentioned, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we had less than half of the 19,000 companies that we have now. So the growth was really just in the recent years, no? And as I mentioned, most of our members are actually small and medium enterprises. But again, there could be variances in the definition of SME among countries. But to our thinking, to our classification, most of those are SME. So it's not true, sir, that we just cater to large multinationals. So we have inclusive membership and across all regions of the world. So I would advise you to actually go to our local network that handles, local affairs in your country, so that you can get in touch with them. They can explain to you how you could better access those platforms that you were mentioning. I'm not very clear on which networking forum you were trying to access, but certainly if you become a member, all these will be available to you. So I'm not clear whether it's your membership process that you're having difficulty with, or even if you're a member, you think that your SME concerns are not being handled. So those are 2 different things. But again, I mentioned we are very inclusive. We have a lot of SMEs, and our programs, as I was just mentioning in my earlier interventions, are really geared, and tools, guidance notes are really geared towards small and medium enterprises. So, yeah.
Yeah, and just to answer the question, so we do not invest in the U.S. We exclusively invest in emerging markets, and specifically in low-income countries, low-middle-income countries, and in certain cases, upper-middle-income countries. But we do co-invest with U.S. businesses in those countries.
All right, I think, thank you everyone for your questions. I think we are at time, but I really want to thank our panelists for a really wonderful discussion. Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us for the Good Trade Summit. It's been really, oh yes, and we have obviously some closing remarks really fast, but thank you so much for your time and attention.
Yeah, so,
and bring your supply chain.
Yeah, so I'm trying to attend. Thank you very much.
Yes, absolutely.
I'd like to ask for your attention and kindly take your seats. We at BCIU often do say that that we nearly are amongst the most idealistic in the room in any given circumstance. But in this instance, I think we're not sure if we're in the top 3 or 4, because now we have remarks from Seth Cohen, who's really a immensely passionate global thinker on partnerships, as well as addressing the gentleman's question to a certain extent, elevating. I think it's fair to say that Seth will do a further job of introducing himself before he begins his remarks. The belief in visibility can equal valuation, and that as Forbes, the most important business media, the most important amongst the most important brands that cover the business community, it's sort of a natural extension of what Forbes has always been about, and known for things like building the lists of the 30 under 30 and so on. So it may not have been mentioned yet in this morning's activity, but that visibility is something that the SMEs need to compete for as much as anything. And so Seth, I would like to invite you up here to help close today, and just to thank everyone again for their time and attention, and particularly recognize again this kind of growing partnership that we've been developing with the International Trade Center. And so Seth, no further ado.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the introduction, and I would be humble enough, not just on behalf of myself, but on Forbes, to say, I would love to say we are the most, or even one of the most, but we are, I think, an important voice. NPR, others are covering this story. Our global partners in media are covering these topics with excellency and proficiency. We actually have a summit going on right now on sustainability just across town. And when I was telling my colleagues that I was coming over here, they said, but we're having a summit, Seth. Where are you going? And I said, well, actually, I'm going to a room where people are really doing this work in important and passionate ways. That's not to say that our guests over at our sustainability summit aren't, but all of you could be anywhere, to quote the words of Jay-Z, but you're here with us today, and we really appreciate that. And I appreciate ITC and BCIU, who are really now family to me in lots of ways. Actually, last year I had the chance to join several programs, and I have talked everywhere I've gone in the world. I've talked about these organizations because they really also are walking the walk. They're not just talking the talk. And some of you probably in any introduction hear about the start, for example, of BCIU is from the Eisenhower administration, and President Eisenhower, who was no slouch, by the way, of supply chains and making sure logistics were in the right places. It's what defended freedom and democracy in the world. And now what we're doing, and all of you are doing, is just as important, if not more important, which is helping preserve our planet, helping preserve democracy in all of its forms, helping advance entrepreneurial capitalism in meaningful ways. So just you might be wondering, why is someone from Forbes here speaking when there were so many more knowledgeable people and professionals on the dais and in panels today? I would say in part, one, because they invited me, and it's hard to say no to these folks. But two, because Forbes is also in the supply chain business in lots of ways. We supply the narratives and the stories and help distribute them to larger audiences all the way around the world. We have a monthly audience of 150 million readers from all around the world. We're in 73 countries with licensees and partners that share the Forbes spirit of entrepreneurial capitalism that has been around for over 105 years. We have the under 30 list, which means we are on the bleeding edge, and sometimes some of you know it really is bleeding, of entrepreneurship and culture change. So we feel we really live at this intersection of people that are doing, but not necessarily have the chance to tell their stories. So I am not a journalist by background. I started my career as an attorney. My grandmother, of blessed memory, took to my brother and I and said, one of you should be a doctor. Nice Jewish grandmother. One of you should be a doctor and one of you should be a lawyer. My brother looked at her and said, I'm going to do what I want to do. And I'm like, I'll be a lawyer. So I was a lawyer for 13 years, but I quickly realized that my true purpose and calling was working around philanthropy and impact. And so for 8 years, I led a global foundation that focused not only on issues here in the United States, but issues around the MENA region, in Africa, in Eastern Europe. And then I took a brief break, had my own SME. I started a business called Applied Optimism, which I have been told many times I'm a bit naive and Pollyanna-ish. And I would say that I actually am just an optimist that applies that optimism every day. But a year and a half ago, I was invited to join Forbes to help lead two initiatives that we have determined are essential to the next 105 years of our business. We've been around for 105 years. And the next 105 years, we believe, are not only going to be talking about business, but also celebrating community and creating impact. So we've launched, and I lead the Forbes Impact Lab, which is an initiative that really does have a lens on how business, the good of business and the business of good. And by that, I mean really how are business drivers changing? And you just heard some brilliant panelists speak about this, but how are business drivers changing? It was one thing just to do good because it was good. Someone just said farmers are the original environmentalists. I thought that was a powerful statement. When we reframe things in that kind of language, it opens people's minds. When we talk about moving fast forward, when we talk about, I think, unreasonable goals, when we put language to some of these ideas, they get exciting. I got excited. I was excited to hear some of these phrases. So that's what we're doing at Forbes Impact Lab. And what I often say, and just shared with a group of philanthropists last night, is for 105 years, Forbes has focused, and I think society has focused on celebrating wealth, ownership, and power. Our lists historically have been the Forbes 400 are lists of the wealthiest people, of the best businesses, the most profitable businesses. We make lists of those who own the most real estate, who may own the most farmland in the world. And by the way, it's surprising when you start to look at who owns and what governments and what private companies own these. And we talk about power, who has the most power. Well, my role and my passion at Forbes and leading our team is that we don't just talk about wealth, we talk about equity. We don't just talk about wealth, we talk about prosperity. We don't just talk about ownership, we talk about equity. And we don't just speak about power, we speak about empowerment. And so I know I see a lot of nodding, so that's good, because I knew that this room would, sometimes people look at me and they're like, what's he talking about? But I knew in this room, I was with some family here. And, you know, I think that idea of focusing on prosperity, on impact, on the ways that we create more equity, the ways we create more empowerment is part of our mission. It's embedded in almost everything you all are doing, certainly everything we heard today. There was nobody that even when people said, well, we'd like to be more profitable or there's ways to do this, it was always because we can create more opportunity for the people that work for us. And that's what good trade really does. Good trade creates prosperity. It creates opportunity. It creates equity. It creates empowerment. And by the way, it's not just the words and it's not just the reports. You can pull up the summer report from the WTO on statistics. I did it this morning because I wanted to be a bit smarter about all of this. And, you know, there are very interesting statistics. You know what was not in that report? And it's no slight to anyone who's from the WTO here. But there were not stories. There were not the stories that you all just were sharing. I don't know if that gentleman's still here. I'm ready to put on some boots and a plaid shirt, and I'm going to get Nebraska nice and go like walk around some cornfields if I'm invited. Can I come? All right. Because that's the stories that we're missing when we talk about good trade. Sometimes we get the story on the headlines, the front page of the Forbes story might be about an entrepreneur. But that entrepreneur is actually talking about trade. They're actually in a supply chain. We, the media, needs to do a better job of connecting those dots. You, stakeholders, need to do a better job of sharing those stories with us in ways that are replicable, the way they are shareable. I'm going to give my email to the end. This is like my assistant, like her brain explodes when I say I give a whole room of people my email. But we want to know because she gets a lot of email. But we do want to know those stories. We do want to know the collaboration. So, you know, I want to share just two stories and examples of how even for me personally, the work you do has ignited change in my mind. One, last summer, not this past summer, over a year ago, my colleague Randall Lane, the chief content officer of Forbes, and I flew over to Poland, and we took the highway into Ukraine. We were going to Lviv and Kyiv to really not only support our colleagues that work at Forbes in Ukraine, but to be there and understand the stories on the ground. It took us 11 hours from the border, from the eastern border of Poland, to get into Ukraine. The reason why is because we were behind 11 hours of trucks. When global supply chains change because seaports are unavailable, because airplanes can't fly in, there was only one way to get into Ukraine. It was really, only one way from that part of Poland, and it was on a train. And I remember sitting there thinking, this is not military equipment. There was some military equipment coming in, but this was basic supplies. This was a country the size of Ukraine needing basic elements for farming. It's the breadbasket of the world. And it was, if you recall, it was the first summer afterwards, we were worrying about a grain crisis, global supply crisis. And it was not, I was thinking about the geopolitical impacts. I was sitting in this car, and truck after truck after truck reminded me that the front line of the battle for democracy in Europe and safety and security of people and sustainability and prosperity of that nation was actually about trade and supply chains. So on a macro level, that's a story that then transformed the way we thought about some of the work you're doing at Forbes. On a personal level, and this anecdote is as fresh as Monday night, I flew in, my daughter is a student at the Fashion Institute of Technology, so if anybody is looking for people in fashion, as a good father, and I was telling her what I was doing this week. And I took out my agenda and I showed her, and she was like, oh, it's very interesting, because actually of my friendship with BCIU, I met the King of Jordan. She thought that was pretty cool. And then Matt Damon is speaking tonight at our summit. I thought she was like, that's what. And then I mentioned this. We were looking at the programs and some talks I was giving, and she said, Dad, do you know that that's the most important thing and I kid you, I'm not making this up. My daughter at the Fashion Institute in fashion school said the most important thing you're going to be listening to is about trade and supply, particularly as it might relate to fashion. Now, this is a young fashionista, a junior at school, who went to school thinking she wanted to be a fashion designer, now wants to be a stylist in media, so I must have rubbed off on her a little bit. But her number one topic, and I kid you not, for an hour, we talked about sustainability and fast fashion. This is what a junior in a university in here in New York City is thinking about and talking about. Yes, she's interested in what people are wearing and, Instagram photos, but the thing she wanted to talk to me about the rest of dinner was the things that you all are talking about. How do we make sure that the clothes I'm wearing, do not harm the planet I'm living on? How do I look good while doing good? How do I make sure that packaging for things that I'm buying, even in cosmetics, are sustainable. And so everything you all are working on goes from the most macro to that young woman right down the street who's thinking about how she wants to be a professional like all of you, but also do it in a positive way. So I say this to you as a challenge. To be honest, I came as an offer because I do love to hear these stories, and I do really enjoy understanding what's going on in the world. It's the greatest privilege of working at Forbes is I wake up in the morning and I can focus over here and I can focus over there, and sometimes they don't understand why I'm focusing on something, and it's just because it's cool. And sometimes it's because I see, because at the place that folks like myself, my colleague that was just up on stage from NPR, we get to connect the dots a little bit, and that's a very powerful and a very privileged thing. But I do want to make a challenge to you. Telling stories and motivating people, maybe even motivating people in your own organization, is no easy task. You all are here this week. I mean, bless you all. This New York is the most complicated week to be in New York. It's to say the least. But you all are here, and hopefully you're getting that shot of energy from a program like today or some other things you're going through. But some of your colleagues back at the office are not. They're actually doing extra work because you're here. So we should just acknowledge that. There's some people, probably spouses at home, that are walking the dog extra. And there's probably some people in your office that are doing extra work while you're listening to this. So you owe all of them a little bit of a comeback on this. And I'm going to give you one simple tool. When I was an applied optimist entrepreneur SME, I used to say that applied optimism is about purpose, knowledge, and wonder. If you have purpose, knowledge, and wonder, you can remain optimistic even in the face of massive adversity. I've seen that across the country and across the world in crises and complex times. But I want to share with you as one last anecdote, a tool that I use, because I've tried to redefine very complicated industries over my career. The law, then philanthropy, now media. As someone said, you like to do hard things. I said, I like to do important things, and important things are hard. So when I left the law, this is the anecdote I want to close with. When I left the law, I was going to work at this global foundation, and I was a partner at a major top 50 law firm in the country with a large book of business. My mother was proud. My grandmother was probably proud. But I wasn't feeling it, and I wanted to go make this difference, and I thought this philanthropy was going to do it. And one of my clients called me up. It's a true story. He called me up, and he said, Seth, it doesn't take an Einstein to go work in philanthropy and social impact. You're so much more important here in the law. Why would you go work in philanthropy and social impact? It doesn't take an Einstein to do that. No, I was kind of offended, to be honest. There was a client who, in one level, he was giving me a backhanded compliment, right? It was like a compliment sandwich. But what he was really doing was saying, the people over in that world, they don't need to be that smart. And you're smarter than that. I was offended not only for me, but for the people that I was going to work with and the people that are in this profession. So I went home and I talked to my wife and I said, could you believe so-and-so said this? And she said, well, no, what can you do? And I said, well, I'm going to become the Einstein of philanthropy. And she looked at me and she was like, honey, you became a lawyer because you're really bad at math. And so, I admire your ambition, but I don't think this is going to end well. And I said, well, you know what? Let me just try. I'm going to come up with a theorem that's going to be like the philanthropy theorem. And then I'll be like Einstein. She's like, great, still don't see it, but keep going. And I said, E equals MC squared. She goes, great, you're going to be a plagiarist now too. You're going to steal his theory. I said, but I have a new theory for it. Roll with me. And my theory that I shared with her that I want to share with you, and that I have shared over and over again to philanthropists, to my senior editors and colleagues, to rooms like this, is E equals MC squared. And I want to challenge you to remember this when you go back and you're with your teams and with your communications directors. If you want to engage people, E, it's a very simple formula. MC squared. Engaging people requires motivation, that's M, competency or skill, that's one of the C's, and capacity. And that might be financial capacity or social capacity. But you need some way to solve for that formula. Now, many of you in this room, I can already tell by listening, have lots of the formula. You're set. I mean, but we know lots of people aren't. Lots of people are not motivated to do this work. We have to figure out the motivation. Some people are motivated, but they don't have the skills. They don't have the knowledge. So we have to solve for the C. Some people are extremely skilled and may even be motivated, but they don't have the financial capacity. They're an SME. They might not have the social capacity because they don't know the right people to collaborate and work with. So if you start to look at problems through this formula, if you try to get that E, figure out what's missing. By the way, for some organizations, all three are missing. It's not easy. Some, you have to figure out the motivation. You have to figure out where the skills are. You have to figure out how social and financial capacity. But I guarantee you, once you solve one of those elements, you can start to more clearly focus on the second. You can start more clearly focusing on the third. It's a formula. Now, my wife was still not convinced that I was the Einstein of philanthropy, and I'm certainly not holding myself out there. But I share this anecdote again because that's the power of words. That's the power of narratives. When you take something as complex as good trade, and by the way, next year maybe we should think about optimistic trade, because I think trade should make you optimistic as well. But I think that once you start to tell those stories or come up with that formula or come up with that phrase, you can start to build excitement and narratives. And by the way, you capture the eyes or the ears of senior editors at Forbes. So I promised you I would give you my email. I did not lie about it. It is scohen, S-C-O-H-E-N, @Forbes.com. I have a team of over 200 journalists. We have over 1,000 contributors. They want to tell the stories of good. They want to tell the story of the farmers in the Sahel. They want to tell the story of the farmers in Nebraska. They want to tell the people who are working on supply chains. They want to hear the stories that are truck drivers. They want to know who's making decisions or who's complaining about trade decisions. The way we are going to make this world better is not just by doing better. It's by making sure we tell better stories of the good we're doing. And as I said to my daughter when I left her the other night, with a lot of leftovers, because we always have to over-order since she's a college student, I said to her, remember, Morgan, when it's all said and done, what matters more is what's done than what's said. When all is said and done, what matters more is what's done than what's said, but it's also important to share. So I hope I've energized you a bit to walk out of this room. Don't just take the tidbits of knowledge you have, although they were insightful and informational, and I think you'll be able to carry all of that insight from our panelists together, but make sure you go back and tell your stories to each other, to your partners, to your customers, to your leaders, to the media, because when we have more good trade, we'll have more good news. Thank you, friends, and I really appreciate the time.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us for the Good Trade Summit. That was a really wonderful conclusion and to a really wonderful day of ideas. And so thank you to all of the dignitaries, and experts, and panelists who joined us today. And have a wonderful rest of your day. It's actually pretty nice outside if you could make it out there. All right, thank you.